founder of Informed Collective.
Scarcity of like resource materials.
Oh my god, secondhand shopping, wow.
2016 trend that's coming back around.
Yeah, I think I would describe it as 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Hello and welcome to the Fra Radio podcast. I'm your host, Rooney and today we are joined by a very special guest. Today we are dissecting sustainability, ESG and everything that goes on behind the scenes. So without any further ado, today we are joined by the one and only Cecily Rooney. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So did you want to just give like a quick brief overview of your background for the audience?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Cecily and I'm the sustainability manager at Accelerato, which is a premium Swedish, mainly footwear brand, although we do apparel as well. And I also am the founder of Informed Collective, which is a new education movement focused on bettering consumer education around sustainability and fashion. My background, so I actually didn't study fashion and I didn't study sustainability, but I'm somehow ended up in this role. I went to University of Manchester and I studied philosophy and ethics. So I suppose I was always really interested in big why questions, challenging the way things have always been done. And I suppose the ethics side of it is really what hooked my interest about marrying the creative kind of fashion world that I always loved in my personal life and this idea of doing better, trying to contribute to doing better.
But there's something that I like to do with the guests that come on, just so the audience can understand your perspective a little bit better. Could you give us your one best lesson or your one best experience you've had in each place that you've worked at so far?
Oh, yes. Okay, nice. So I started at ASOS. ASOS was an incredible place to begin my journey in the industry. It's true what they say about fast fashion, that it's fast. I would say my best experience there was like working with absolute pioneers of kind of the social ethical space. Incredible work was being done in a number of different sourcing countries from Bangladesh to Mauritius. And I think, my tiny role in that, I'm not to try and claim that I had a massive part of it, but being around those kind of people was such a joy. And I think I learned so much from those like real change makers, especially in a context where you're in a high street fashion brand, which is extremely fast. So to have that kind of work happening was really special. On the Farfetch side of things, that's the luxury industry. Farfetch at the time when I worked there anyway was very driven by data. So my biggest lesson there was around the importance of data, and it was kind of the first time I had really thought about how critical it is to be able to measure properly. When I was working there, we were very lucky to have a data analyst in our team who did so much of the sustainability insights, and with that we could really tangibly prove that like what we were doing was working, or this strategy had impact here, or however it worked. So data was the one there. And then at the Better Cotton Initiative, it was such a different experience for me. For those who are kind of less familiar with it, it's in the non-profit sector and it's focused on agriculture. It was quite a reality shock when I realised how linked fashion is to farming. And it's not something you necessarily think about that often. So my work there was on farming, literally. It was on
such a difference from fast fashion,
right? Literally. And it was so amazing, and it was really around like agricultural practices so that you could grow cotton more sustainably than conventional. And there's other cotton programs like organic or regenerative, which are incredible. Better Cotton sits at kind of, it's the whole idea of it at the time anyway was that it was better than conventional. It's not trying to claim to be amazing. But yeah, there it was really around understanding tier 4 of the supply chain and linking up that actually this is people's livelihoods, and the wider space of the fashion industry isn't just photography and models and amazing couture clothing. It's real farmers who have a role to play in it. So that was kind of a long answer, but those are my kind of lessons and insights.
And then you spoke a little bit about sustainability in the intro. I mentioned ESG. We are going into that a lot later in the episode, but just for the audience's initial understanding, can you break down what these terms mean? Because I feel like they get crossed over quite a bit.
Yeah, you're right. They do get crossed over. That's kind of the problem, is that we don't really have like a playbook or a a defined way that we all talk about sustainability. Sustainability in its like corest essence is really around ensuring that you take just as much as you need, but not so much that you then kind of negatively impact future generations. And if you think about it, like the term to sustain, or the verb rather, it's the same as if you're like running a marathon. Like to sustain your pace in a marathon, you're not going to like sprint at the beginning and then be burnt out by the end. Or the same as like, you know, when people talk about you have to sustain your business financially, you're not going to get like $1,000 and then like just absolutely splash it and use the whole thing and then have no money left in the bank. So the idea is to sustain is to ensure that we are careful with what we take. And then when you apply that to the fashion industry, that's when you really start thinking about like, okay, how do we ensure that we are not overtaking, we're not being unsustainable, we're not damaging future generations by taking too much natural resource. So that's kind of the essence of it. And then, you know, again, if we apply it to the fashion industry, most people would then think about it over these 3 lenses, which is ESG. ESG stands for environmental is the E, social is the S, and G is governance. Environmental is very much focused on the planet, obviously. And I'd say the big things that we focus within the industry on is carbon emissions. So carbon, for anyone who's heard this word doesn't know what it means necessarily, is a greenhouse gas emission, and it's, you know, a very, very large contributor to climate change. So what we try and do in the industry is measure how much carbon that we use, and we find ways to bring it down. And that's seen, you know, that's not just fashion, that's everyone is doing that. S is on social, so that's people. So people make our clothes and shoes and makeup and hair accessories. So that's really about thinking of, okay, so who are those people? Where are they working? What are the conditions like in these factories? Do people have their labour rights upheld? Do people have their human rights upheld? And so really focusing in on that social side, and you can cut it in many different ways. You know, there's subsets of gender equality, we can look at discrimination, modern slavery is a very big topic. So ensuring that we really, put a spotlight on the people and think about how are we honouring their craft or their work and ensuring that it's safe. And then G is really governance. It's kind of the forgotten one. People don't necessarily always think about governance that much. Again, the term to govern is like government. So it's like, how do you manage the structure? What's the framework by which you're operating? That's really tapping into things like policies and processes and making sure your brand or your company or whoever is operating in a way that's, you know, respects those who work for you and the wider community. But I just think one more point on that is that lots of companies as well are actually moving away from using this word sustainability. A school of thought exists where, you know, can fashion ever really truly be sustainable? The whole idea of fashion is that, you know, we're making stuff. So a lot of companies are changing that terminology to be more responsible. So responsibility strategies, you work in the responsibility team. I think it's really interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more companies kind of moving that way.
Because we've definitely seen like a shift from like the types of companies that kind of take sustainability or any term of like green terminology away from like their collections.
Yeah.
Would you say that now it's been kind of overused, the word sustainability, that they want to use other words?
Yeah, I think so. So I think you touch on a really like core point around this idea of greenwashing. And I think, you know, it's very difficult now for fashion brands to confidently make claims, and there's a lot of reasons as to why that's the case. You know, there were instances in the past of brands greenwashing, and for those unfamiliar with that term, it's the idea of over-exaggerating your claims around sustainability. So yes, there absolutely is hesitation around using the term sustainable. Any kind of language to do with like eco or green, you just won't see that anymore. I think it's brands are kind of in this space right now where we're like transitioning. Like I kind of talk about it a lot. It's like you kind of have to get through the weeds to get out the other side. And we are in this kind of sticky position in sustainability right now where it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But we'll get there. And I think we'll see, you know, we might see that term crop back up in the future. But for now, I agree with you that I think it's called green hushing people talk about. It's like it's quite hard to be 100% confident in anything that you're saying. So you do see companies kind of pulling back on it a bit.
Yeah, would you say that, because you said that companies are kind of pulling back, would you say that that kind of deters new companies for like new startup businesses from having initiatives?
It's interesting you asked that. I think there's a difference. So one thing which is really important to highlight is how hard it is to drive systemic change across an industry. If you think about, like, the fashion industry has been operating for hundreds, like, dare I say, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? Like, it's one of the oldest trades, the trade of textiles. So with that has built these like ingrained systems where people are trading on markets, or people have a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who owns this factory. So the notion of upheaving that and turning it into a fully functioning, sustainable supply chain is very, very difficult. And, you know, brands are trying, and you know, together we are chipping away at trying to change these practices that have happened for many, many years, but it's hard to do. So that's why I feel like a lot of brands get quite a lot of negative press about not doing enough fast enough. And true, like, you know, we aren't doing enough fast enough, but it is, you know, it is very, very difficult to do it because these are so entrenched into just the way the industry works. So I think, to answer your question, like, for startups, it's kind of different, because if you're a startup, you don't have to change the way that you've always operated. You have an ability then to choose how you want to be as a brand. Not to say that it will be as easy as not thinking about sustainability. Sustainability is hard. You're likely going to be faced with, you know, it might be more expensive, it might be more challenging to find suppliers who can give you these materials with the right MOQs, etc. But I think if you're a startup, you're in a position where you can decide who you want to be. You can decide what your brand stands for.
So from your perspective, what kind of state is the fashion and product industry currently in terms of sustainability and ESG?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I think I would describe it as 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
And if I were to reflect on, you know, I've only been in the industry 8 years, and I started at ASOS when I was about, I think I was like 23, 24. So I'd had some fun. I lived in Spain for a bit and stuff, and then thought I need a real job. So I think if I were to reflect on like the 8 years I've been in the industry, a lot of positive change has happened. You know, if we were to look at things like the circular movement, for example, secondhand 8 years ago, in my world anyway, was like, yeah, it was there, but it wasn't as mainstream as it is today. And brands definitely weren't really thinking about it as a revenue stream. You know, today you can see brands like literally white labeling technology to have secondhand right on their website, which is so cool. Like, customers for the first, you know, maybe not for the first time, but definitely like commercially, like the first time being able to really access secondhand products from a brand, and brands can take revenue from it, which is like the other like silver bullet here. Like, that's such a smart way of working. And so I think when you look at things like that, that's really positive. Not saying that circularity solves all the problems, it definitely doesn't, but it's a step in the right direction. On the other side of things, like, I think we as an industry, we all know that there's still a long way to go. Back in 2015 at the COP conference in 2015 in Paris, everyone and COP, for those, again, unfamiliar with it, it's the Conference of the Parties. It's like the big sustainability meeting that happens every year. And it's full of UN directors and brands and government and media, and, you know, anyone who's anyone is there. It's like this massive thing. And in these big conferences, the world agrees to what they're doing about sustainability. And back in 2015, this is when the Paris Agreement, you hear it a lot on the news. Essentially, everyone agreed then that in order to try and combat climate change, we would, the UN would ensure that by 2030, we would not let global temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees. I think the terminology was actually way under 2 degrees. Today, you hear this 1.5, like, again, I'm sure listeners may have heard it on the news. And that is really around, if we were to measure the global temperatures, we can't allow a world in which we hit over 1.5 degrees, because that then triggers so many massively detrimental situations around, you know, icebergs melting and crazy weather and, you know, all of this kind of stuff that happens when climate change is happening before our eyes. So from that, brands and companies and governments then build strategies to ensure that they are not they are not contributing to climate change. And there's lots of ways we can do that. So, from in the fashion industry, looking at things like the materials that we use. And I think one positive thing about where we are now is the real push in next generation materials. It's so cool. There's like materials now where you have leather made from pineapples, and we're looking at one with mushrooms at the moment. There's incredible technology going into like bio-based polymers to build like synthetic materials, yes, but from like really way, way, way better raw sources. So I just think that space is super exciting. And yeah, it's really hard to scale them. And yes, it's going to take some time before the most of the industry adopt these next generation materials. But it's so cool. And like this idea of like science and engineering meeting the fashion industry, you get this melting pot of just like potential. So if anyone is interested in kind of the science and material world, yeah, just take a look at like what's going on in the next generations. This is what they call it, the kind of the next generation innovation space. The state we're in right now, there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of good. The wider picture is that things are still trending quite negatively. We have to do more as an industry. We've got to start financing some of these changes at scale. And we've got to start coming together and collaborating as brands and as suppliers and as stakeholders within the industry. But, I think I personally definitely see the hope and the glimmer of potential. And I think the path forward is one that's going to be hard, but I think there is a way that we can do it.
So you spoke a little bit about kind of climate change and the industry's impacts. For people that aren't in the industry, that don't understand what the impacts are or how that kind of progresses, could you give us like a brief summary of what climate change is and the global impacts and how that affects each stage?
Yeah, of course. And I'll say, this is why I set up Informed Collective. So Informed Collective is all around demystifying sustainability, making it accessible in a way that's like not preachy, it's engaging, it's informative, and I do it through the lens of fashion because that's the industry I'm in, but I would love to roll it out to other parts like makeup and food and tech, but it's really around demystifying sustainability. So most people will agree that the leading science says that the world is like billions of years old, right? Yeah. And over that long period of history, we have seen like natural changes to the Earth's global temperatures, and we know that through like rock formations and the study of kind of the Earth. But over that period of time, when those changes to the globe's temperature happened, they, number one, happened over very, very, very long periods. And number two, they happened for like natural reasons. A good example of this is like the film Ice Age. That happened in the Ice Age. What we did in this film. But like that's a really nice example of a period of time where it was much cooler. And there's been periods of history where it's much hotter. So that's kind of something that has always happened. So the idea of the Earth's temperature changing isn't new. If you then fast forward to like the modern day, about the Industrial Revolution time, and if you then look at the science to say, okay, what was the rise in temperatures since then to now, what you'll see is this really, really sharp spike. And that sharp spike, most people will agree, is down to human activity. And what humans are doing is creating energy through the burning of fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are things like coal and gas. And when you burn coal and gas, you create energy. And when you create that energy, you can make stuff. So everything we see today in this room, this sofa, the clothes I'm wearing, the earrings I've got in, these were all made using energy. Most of the time, this energy is from these unsustainable sources. And when you burn fossil fuels to create energy, they release something called greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions are things like carbon, methane, and there's other ways that you can also greenhouse gas emissions go into the atmosphere, but this is a big one. When you burn those greenhouse gas emissions, they enter the atmosphere, and when you do a lot of it, they create almost like this blanket around the world, if you like. And then when the sun heats up the Earth, those heat rays can no longer just escape back into the atmosphere. So you create this situation where the heat is getting trapped. And when that happens, we see global temperatures rise. And when they rise is when we see really catastrophic implications of that. So, the wild weather we have seen over the last few years, particularly like a lot of it in the global south, massive flooding, droughts, thunderstorms, typhoons, even like the wildfires that we saw in the West as well, in Portugal, in Greece, in LA. This is a lot of people believe that this is down to climate change. And for the fashion industry, that also has a really direct impact. Polyester, acrylic, these synthetic materials are made from oil and gas. They're made from fossil fuels. So we have a role to play there in thinking about, okay, how many greenhouse gas emissions are we as an industry contributing to? Are there ways that we can try and minimize that?
When we're in lectures, they kind of speak a little bit about scarcity of like resource materials and how like the change in temperatures will affect like the growth of certain materials. Is there any scarcity around the fashion industry's materials, and how would that kind of affect the future investments put into the sustainability?
I think you touched on something there that's like one of the cruxes of the issue, is that when we look at sustainability, it's all so interlinked. So if you think about cotton, for example, cotton is grown in fields, it's grown by farmers. So when we see changes to global temperatures, when we see droughts happen or unexpected rainfall, that impacts the crop. So then if you don't have a good crop that year, then you don't have a good yield of cotton, which means there's less cotton available. The other implication of that is the farmers' livelihoods. Like, that's food on the table that's not going to be there anymore. So yeah, it's definitely very much interlinked. When it comes to like the scarcity of materials, there's two ways you can look at it. You know, well, the reason why synthetic materials are so popular in the industry is, one, because they were created to serve a specific purpose, and polyester, for example, is very, very good at serving that purpose in certain situations. Football shirts, for example, you're not going to have a football shirt made of silk. Like, you're not going to have...
It's not viable.
No, it's not going to work. You're not going to have a sports top made of cotton.
It's one bougie team.
Yeah, and you're just going to sweat. Like, so, you know, these synthetic materials do serve a purpose. But at the same time, I think the reality is, when you're creating garments, these sorts of materials are very, very cheap and they're very easy to access. If you compare that with something like regenerative cotton, so regenerative cotton is this kind of movement within farming that lots of brands are really interested in right now. And I think what's really exciting about regenerative is the idea that from the very beginning of the life cycle, you're already in a position where there is less carbon being emitted by these crops. How regenerative works, like very, very top level, is that you kind of treat the soil in such a way, you cultivate the land so that essentially the land is able to kind of sequester carbon. And by that, what we mean is like it can kind of absorb some of the carbon emissions and have a much lower impact compared to other forms of farming. Again, not something you necessarily think about when you think about the fashion industry, but it's an exciting kind of movement that's happening. It's much harder for a brand to access regenerative cotton than it is to access polyester. Polyester is very, very, very easily accessible and it's very cheap. Regenerative cotton takes years and years and years to grow and to be able to measure the success of that regenerative farming practices, and it's obviously much more expensive. So when you compare both of those things, you can see why we're still operating in a way that's perhaps less sustainably minded than we could be doing. But I think it's important to look at kind of the positives of it, and the fact that we can even sit here and talk about regenerative farming in a fashion podcast is progress nonetheless.
So we've spoken a lot about the businesses' impacts and how they act on sustainability and ESG and all these movements and processes. But how does the consumer feel? Like, how does consumer behavior play a part in these processes in the future?
I think consumer behavior is a huge potential, and I think it's really exciting about how much power the consumer has to be part of this, to really help contribute to driving positive change in the fashion industry. And there's many different ways that can happen. And this is the whole reason why I set up Informed Collective. Informed Collective's mission is around bettering consumer education around these topics. I found, working inside the industry, that I was surrounded in my day job by like incredible people with so much knowledge and passion and skills, and working on this really like industry changing stuff in my wider network. But as soon as I would go and sit down with my mates at a cafe or whatever and start talking about this, people had no idea what I'm on about. Even things that I would consider, you know, common knowledge, like polyester is made from fossil fuels. People didn't realize this. And I think a lot of it is because it's not really spoken about. If you work in these spaces, yes, we hear it all the time. But as soon as you step into the general public, it's not a topic you learn in school, and it's not a topic that's like you chat about with your mates that much. So Informed Collective's mission is really around bridging that gap, but doing it in a way that's engaging. It's fashion first. Like, come on, fashion industry is one of the most creative, exciting, like...
It's one of the most fun to look at.
Yeah, like, it's up there with film, music, sport, fashion. Like, it's a joy to work in the fashion industry. And, you know, I'm a fashion girly. I love it. This is why I do it, because I'm so passionate about this, like, creative, exciting, buzzy industry. So I feel like sustainability can sit hand in hand with that. We can communicate with consumers about this in a way that doesn't have to be eco. It doesn't have to be, you know, in the past there's been a little bit of a moral high ground with sustainability. You are a better person if you shop at this brand, or you're a bad person if you shop at this brand. I don't really buy that. Like, I think instead what we should be focusing on is more the everyday choices people are making, whether that's what you want to buy down the shops for your next night out, or whether that's how you care for your clothes. You know, there's lots of different ways that consumers can play a part in driving the positive change. And I think it's really exciting that we're now, as you know, with Informed Collective, I'm putting the spotlight on that. I don't think it's easy for consumers to always be able to decode what some of the messaging is around sustainability. I don't think it's the consumer's sole responsibility, but I think all the work that's happening in the industry can sit in harmony with this idea of bettering the education side for the general public, so that together we can all kind of work as a unit to drive the change, if that makes sense. Or like some tangible things that we can do as consumers. The first is around like really just check yourself next time you want to buy something. And like I said, like I love the fashion industry. I buzz off of like putting an outfit on and feeling like an absolute queen. Like I love that. But I don't think we need to be operating in a way that you just consume more. Like, I was absolutely one of those people who would look in the new in pages of my favorite brands every day, literally every day, and be like, I need this. And, you know, with the rise of social media, particularly apps where it's super accessible, you know, like TikTok Shop, for example.
You see so much on a daily basis.
So much. And it's pushing a message that you need this. And I would just question that, like, do you actually need that? It's interesting when you look at fashion and footwear is one of the commodities in modern society that has gone down in value. If you look at things like, you know, olive oil or Freddo is just the classic, isn't it? Or, I don't know, train tickets. These have all increased in value over time. Clothing, apparel, particularly footwear, I think, has devalued. But the work and the craft and the skills it takes to make these things still exist. It's just that we now view them as expendable. We view them as things that we can just throw in the bin. I think that's particularly interesting when you look at, like, I went to a factory where I was looking at shoemaking, and I actually have a post about it on my Informed Collective Instagram. And the art of shoemaking is a craft. It is like a craft that has been handed down for generations. It is so skilled. It is such a intricate piece of art to make a shoe. And yet we're selling leather shoes for 15 quid. Like, it is not, the value is not £15 for that leather shoe. Like, that is a real, like, piece of art that should be respected, and a price tag should be attributed to it that is credit for what it's actually worth. But I think it's really difficult when we've seen these like ultra fast fashion companies come in, and the reason, you know, many reasons why, but one of the biggest reasons why they can sell so cheap is because they pack volume. So there's a huge amount of stuff being made, and that stuff, if that doesn't sell to a customer, and if that's not loved by a customer, then what happens with it? It just ends up in landfill, or it ends up in other countries around the world and contributing to their own waste streams there. Like, this is one of the biggest issues we face is how much stuff we are making as an industry. So that kind of links back to this idea of the circularity. If consumers stop buying so much first-hand stuff and instead really focused on upcycling, sharing stuff with your friends, second-hand things, that really then positively contributes to not creating more things. There's something called the displacement rate, which is this idea of what we want to get to is that we, instead of buying firsthand, you buy secondhand. What we don't want to do is something that I did when I first started looking into this space was go, oh my God, secondhand shopping. Wow, this is like guilt-free. I'm just going to buy loads of stuff.
Overconsumption shifts.
Yeah. Really good about myself because it's all from Depop or Vinted or Vestio or eBay. I feel great about myself. But I don't think that's quite the point of it. You know, exactly as you just say, like the overconsumption shifts from first-hand brands to second-hand market. And then the other problem you have, and this is what the displacement rate talks about, is this idea of it's really great if you're shopping secondhand, but if you're still shopping firsthand, you've not actually brought your kind of consumption down at all. You're still buying firsthand, so you're just buying more. What you want to be doing is, instead of buying firsthand, you are buying secondhand, if that makes sense.
It's definitely one step closer, because I feel like when, as a consumer, if you see all of this and you hear it, it becomes a bit frightening. Like you don't know, like you feel like you can't buy this one thing. And like you said earlier, it's a moral high ground. Yeah. So you don't really want to be on the wrong end of the stick. Exactly. It's an easy way to bridge that gap.
You know, the art of styling, this is so important. And I feel like this is something that the sustainable movement hasn't really tapped into, and it's something I'd love to do more with Informed Collective. Even if you had the most incredible wardrobe in the world, those are just singular pieces. Like you got your tops, you got your trousers, you got your skirts, you got your whatever. To make an amazing outfit is this idea of styling them all together. That inherently is actually quite a sustainable notion, because it's the idea of reusing things, getting creative with what you already have, building outfits together that make you buzz, make your heart sing, make you feel amazing.
Like you said with the social media, there's definitely been a shift from what I've seen anyway, with like actual influencers who they take an outfit back. You know, the trend with like the 2016 trend that's coming back around, and they'll bring out all their clothes and they'll restyle it. Because I saw Informed Collective, I think it was you that posted the ribbons on the shoes and the trainers, and how to like restyle that, make it feel fresh again. Yeah. So I definitely feel like there is a lot more inspiration for restyling clothes. Like that's made it a lot easier for people to do that and shop secondhand.
100%. I also feel like a trend in the industry we're seeing right now is this hyper customization. So people love like things that are truly theirs. So we're seeing trends with like bag charms, or like little charms on your shoes, and like, oh, I love all of that. But again, that's the idea of like amending something so that it feels unique, it feels like yours. You can do that so easily with stuff that you already own. You can look around your house and think, okay, what little cute thing do I already have in my house that I can like add onto my bag? That bag then feels different. That bag then feels exciting. So I totally agree with you. I feel like there's so many ways that we can think about this idea of upcycling. It doesn't have to be like craft and big patches on your jeans, or, you know, it doesn't have to be like that. It can be way more subtle. It could be about, you know, wearing big earrings, for example, as bracelets. Like that's something that's so simple. If you have big hoop earrings,
I never thought about that.
Style in a different way. Yeah, like there's lots of little really simple things you can do to just get creative with what you already own.
Kind of like on the other side of that, of what are available to consumers and what options are out there, what is kind of one thing that is genuinely improving in the industry, and how can that kind of help?
I think brands are getting clearer with communicating of like what's going into items, and I think this is something that consumers can really take control of. So when we look at materials, for example, I would never, before I got into this space, I would never go down the shops, see an amazing item that I love, and then check the composition label. It's just not a step I would ever think to do. So I think that's something that consumers can really start to think about, and I think brands are getting really good at being really clear about what's going into items. And it's also like segueing into digital product passports that we can talk about in a second. But I think, as a consumer, that's a step you can take. If you have synthetic blends, quite often they're not necessarily going to be as warm as something like if you look at jumpers, for example, a polyester cotton blended jumper is unlikely to be as warm as like a cashmere jumper. Yes, a cashmere jumper comes at a higher price, but if you could get that second hand, there's an argument to say that might be a more durable option.
We've covered a lot of content here, and I thought it would be nice to do a little wrap up for our listeners. So we've got a mixture of for our students, new entrepreneurs, and everyone kind of looking to have something of their own. What is something that you think they could implement to kind of improve their sustainability and their strategic thinking as in their businesses?
Yeah, I would say like I have two points here. Yeah. The first is be informed with the decisions you make. And this is what I'm doing with Informed Collective. If you are choosing something to add into your collection, just know the implications of that choice. Like, do your research, do you understand what the material is made from, understand where it's coming from, understand like what factory conditions are like in the suppliers' factories that you're working with. So I would say like the more informed you can be before you make choices about I want this or I want this or I want it to look like this, I think that puts you in a way stronger position than a lot of the industry is in today. So that's one thing, is like make your choices informed, take that extra step to do your research. I think the other thing I would say is like you're in this extraordinarily like exciting position where you can build a company or a brand or whatever it is with these values implemented from the very beginning. And yeah, in real life, like it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive. It's probably going to be a little bit harder. But you are contributing to a movement that will actually really help try and change the world. I think that's a really exciting thing. And, you know, today in 2026, the fact that these students are even learning about these topics, the fact that I'm sat here on a podcast today just shows like how much has changed over this short period of time. And I think even if you don't go on to make your own brand, or even if you're not a designer or a developer or whatever, say you want to go into merchandising, if you have sustainability in the back of your mind as a merchandiser, oh my gosh, like that is so powerful. Like the amount of times I've had to try and explain these concepts to people who never learned it at school. They didn't have that opportunity at university or college or whatever. So I think like that is so powerful, and it's really exciting and really positive that even if it doesn't feel like you're directly working on products, even if you're not the one to be making those choices, you play a role in this as marketeers, as buyers, as merch, as graphic designers, whatever it is. Like sustainability interacts with all of those spheres, and the fact that if you take the time to learn what it is and to really think about your position in the industry as a cog in a bigger wheel, that's really, really powerful. And also just to mention that if there's anyone listening today who is intrigued by what I've been talking about with Informed Collective, definitely get involved. We have an Instagram page, which is informed_collective. There's a LinkedIn page as well. I'm building it's like a 3-part project. So the first is around informing people via in-person workshops. So we're going into schools, universities and businesses across the UK to really just go and talk to people about sustainability, to try and demystify it, to make people realise that every single person wears clothes. Whether you think fashion is silly or whether you think it's exciting, you're wearing clothes right now. So it plays a role in all of our lives. The other way we're doing it is through content on socials. So making content feel engaging, exciting, and trying to make it feel like, try and demystify some of the complexity of sustainability via that avenue. And then the other very exciting part of Informed Collective is that we have real momentum from the industry right now. You know, I've had hundreds of people reach out to me wanting to be a part of this. So this idea of the collective is something that I hope to grow on. So if people are interested in getting involved, if people are curious around what does this Informed Collective mean, I would say I'm still very much scoping it out right now, but there is something in this. There's energy here, and I think I would be completely delighted to have more for our students engaged on this topic.
Yeah, we had another podcast that I filmed a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about adaptability and constant changing. So the idea of your scope constantly evolving, that is something that I think fits the brand quite well as well. But thank you so much for coming on today, and thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you so much to everyone that's listened today, and all of the FRA students and new businesses. Feel free to take tips and tricks from today's episode. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.